All right, I'm here with Patrick. Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
Good to see you. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, my name is Patrick McAvena. I'm one of the co-founders of Moving Pieces Interactive, which is the small game development studio based in Brooklyn, New York. We've been around for a couple years now. Our first project was a game called Dodo Peak, which is like an isometric arcade platformer, which came out on the launch of Apple Arcade and also released on Nintendo Switch last summer. And since then, we've started a new project called Shoulders of Giants, which is a roguelike uh, set in a stylized sci-fi universe. And we've used a lot of Houdini. And yeah, I'm the primary like 3D artist, Houdini user on the project too.
Cool. And what's your presentation today going to be about?
So it's about creating stylized landscapes using Houdini. So we're kind of taking a like behind the scenes look at how we use the landscape system and some other tools to build levels out for our game, and also go into how we created some generators and other art assets to populate the world with.
Right on. Well, let's jump in.
Cool, let's do it. Hi, and welcome to this presentation, Prototyping Stylized Landscapes in Houdini. My name is Patrick McAvena. I'm an artist and developer at Moving Pieces Interactive. And during this presentation, I'm going to show you a behind-the-scenes look at how we created some landscapes for our game, Shoulders of Giants. We're also going to learn some tips and tricks and a few different approaches to creating unique-looking stylized landscapes for games. A little bit about me. I'm one of the founders of Moving Pieces Interactive, a game studio based in New York City. Our first project, Dodo Peak, was a grid-based isometric platformer, and you can currently find it on Apple Arcade and Nintendo Switch. Our latest project, Shoulders of Giants, which is what we're going to be talking about today, is a roguelike set in a stylized sci-fi universe. Before working on games, I spent about a decade working as a 3D artist on commercials and advertising. Been using Houdini now for about 3 years. I consider myself an intermediate, so a lot of the techniques that I'm going to be going through today, I would say are definitely applicable to everyone, but especially if you're a beginner or an intermediate user, you're going to be able to really follow along and get a lot from these, but I hope some more advanced folks are going to learn some stuff as well. So to show you a little more about the game, I'm going to show you a teaser that we made. All right, here we go. So in terms of what we're going to cover today, we're going to kind of talk about mostly about how we use Houdini to prototype and create stylized environments, landscapes, terrains, and also a couple other things. We're going to start off by looking at the concept art for the project, and we're going to break down a few different approaches we use to create level layouts while trying to stay as true to the aesthetic of that concept art in our game world as possible. We're then going to wrap up by showing a few simple tools we created for creating additional environment art assets / generators. So in terms of project challenges and desires, as you can see on the right-hand side there is our concept art, initial concept art for the project created by our illustrator, Max. So as you can see, the concept art has a lot of different hard edges, which are difficult to achieve using like traditional Heightfield like terrain generation techniques. 90-degree edges tend to like break down pretty quickly and can look very jagged. You could try increasing the resolution, but then you get things that are really dense, and again, it's still doesn't have the sharpest of edges that we kind of wanted to try to create. There's also a lot of negative space here, which was also going to present a little bit of a challenge. There's varying verticality that has these very sharp edges again, so things go straight up, maybe not at a slope all the time. We also knew that we wanted to use Houdini to help us generate as many useful masks as possible that we would then use in our shader system to generate foliage and other things, and also vary the color and shading of different items. The goal is to create the most flexible and easy to use system to create new levels and worlds in as well. So this is the end result of this first technique that we're going to go over here, which is pretty straightforward. It uses mostly kind of like node-based polygonal modeling, which I think if you're going to do in like a traditional 3D package would be a nightmare, but it's actually pretty flexible using Houdini's node-based workflow. One of the advantages of this technique is you can have obviously really sharp edges very easily. It's also the most precise in terms of gameplay design and level layout. You can have like a really high degree of precision. However, once you get a little more complex in terms of like laying things out, it's not the easiest to adjust sometimes. But we'll get into that a little more. We have another technique we're going to go over here in a little bit too, which kind of marries a couple different things together. So in terms of like the gist of this technique, this is a very simple kind of like early design test that we did. Yeah, it's kind of like a basic landscape. It's got a couple different mountains on it and kind of like this like sloping terrain. We wanted to see like, you know, kind of using like a very straightforward like kind of curve poly extrude method, like what we could get out of that. So starting out with the technique, we do use a Heightfield to kind of generate just the base level of terrain. We add a little bit of noise to that. And then we convert that to polygons. And then we do a couple different things. We end up clipping the terrain, so we gotta get this like nice, like kind of chunked out piece that's not just like a flat grid. It's got some nice edges to it. We then extrude it. We do a couple different soft transforms on it to kind of slope different pieces of it. We do a poly reduce, and then we bevel it. And that's like the base kind of piece of the terrain. And then in terms of like, I think this is a little cooler part, is in terms of creating these kind of like auxiliary like side mountains, just kind of draw out a very like simple curve, and you can be like very, very loose with this stuff because, you know, we're gonna resample it, jitter the edges, and kind of use Houdini to make, you know, kind of ugly shapes more interesting. So we do that here because this is a kind of uglyish base kind of shape that we have. And then we like resample it and kind of distort the edges a bit, and then we extrude it. We also do a remesh on it, which kind of creates some like interesting like variation in the topology. We then just do a couple different soft transforms on it to kind of like blend different pieces back down into that base shape. We add a little bit of noise to it to make it look a little more mountainy and distorted. Do a poly bevel, and then we extrude it again to kind of blend it into our landscape. So here it is blended, and then we just basically use the same technique for the mountain just to the right of it. And we do another remesh, which kind of actually does a nice job of like blending everything together and kind of gets rid of these like a lot of like transitional lines where you kind of have two pieces of geo that look like they've just been placed together. This kind of smooths things out actually pretty nicely. We just do a couple different like cleanup operations. We remesh everything, like I said, bevel it again. And then, as I was saying, we kind of wanted to use Houdini to just make some like simple vertex colors that we could use to as masks in our shading system in Unreal. So we're basically just creating some groups based on normals and curvature, and applying some vertex color to those faces. And then yeah, this is the kind of final result of our first experiment that we did. One very important thing is if you ever try to bring in vertex color information into Unreal, it's very easy to like forget that that information has to be on the vertices and not the primitives. So if you're ever like, why is my vertex color information not coming in? Just make sure you can always do like an attribute promote if for whatever reason you're doing color information on primitives, which I was actually to get this kind of look that I wanted. But yeah, just throw in an attribute promote and you're good. Just change it over to vertices. So getting a little more complex with this same technique. This is kind of like another version where it's, as you can see, it's a little more complicated. Have a couple different like land masses in there. Basically using the same approach. We kind of have very loose curve that we're remeshing and resampling, extruding to make a more interesting base shape, which you can see here. Adding a little bit of noise again, and then we basically go in and we just kind of repeat this process for all the different like land masses that we want. And then we can do a couple different like booleans to kind of like cut things out and create some like nice negative shapes, or sorry, negative space in the shape. We layer everything together again, and we remesh it all, and we use that same technique where we add a little bit of vertex color for our shading system in Unreal. And this approach, I think it's the strongest part of it is you can get really high degree of precision and you can get really nice like hard edges, but it's not the most flexible approach in terms of like if you want to create more complicated levels and like landscapes. So we kind of wanted to like iterate that a little more, and we wanted to try to find a technique that was a little more simple and straightforward and streamlined. So I think the approach that we're going to use moving forward is this next one that we're going to get into here, which is basically using a mix of height fields and polygons in certain areas based on the height field information. And I think this is a little bit more like flexible approach. As you can see here, this is like the end result in engine, a level from our game using this approach. So getting into it here, yeah, this is like the end result in Houdini. Yeah, we got our base kind of like Heightfield, and we have like a playable area, which is kind of like this like yellow area here. And the way that we created that playable area is a couple different ways you could do it. You basically just want to mask, right? And you want to use that mask to kind of have it, however you want your kind of playable area to be, more like flat, etc. So we used just a simple sphere and then a mountain stop to kind of distort it. But you could also use like a Photoshop to like draw out some like interesting shapes, which we've also done, and import that and use that as a mask. So yeah, basically you're using this mask and you're basically just layering on a bunch of different height field noises to get the look that you want. So here's kind of our, we got these kind of sharpy edge kind of mountains and this kind of like big kind of like playable area in the center, kind of like a big canyon going on. And then it's, if you want to create some like interesting things going on, like here we have this kind of ravine that like separates like the different areas. We basically just drew out a curve and used a poly wire, and we do a mask by object. We basically project like, basically you get a mask back on your height field. Then we use some noise to kind of like shift that down to create that ravine, which is cool, but like you can see that it's got some like very jagged edges going on. So what we then do is we use the height field and we use that same piece of geometry we used to create the mask with. And we basically extract part of the height field, cut it out, turn it into a polygon, and then we clean it up. So then you can have, it doesn't have those like really sharp kind of ugly edges. and then we just kind of use this piece on top of the Heightfield, and it ends up working pretty good. And then we can just kind of reuse this approach if we want to do a lot of different operations. So it's kind of like a mix of polygons and also yeah, Heightfields. So we have this kind of like hero piece of terrain here as well, using the same kind of technique. Basically just like drew out a curve to get a shape, extruded it, and then mask by object, and yeah, we cut it out from the Heightfield, and then yeah, basically just convert that back into a polygon, and we use another mask to kind of like pull back this piece to kind of slope it down. You could also do like a soft transform if you want as well. So this like blends very, very nicely with the Heightfield, and also you can get those really nice sharp edges that we wanted for our game. That for us, this works really well. So the next thing that that we want is, again, we wanted Houdini to kind of generate a lot of different layers that we could use as masks in our shading system, and also to generate and place foliage in Unreal. So we just use a very simple Heightfield erode node, and we sim it out a little bit, but instead of applying it to the actual like height, we just use it as basically we use a bunch of copy stamps to use the layers, and we export those layers into our HDA. But we don't, I think if we applied it directly to the terrain itself, sorry, to the height information, it would be too realistic for us, and we want something that's a bit more stylized. So again, just using those layers, we ended up creating a couple other layers just using like mask by feature. So here it's just like curvatures. We got these nice outlines that we use. Just different options for you that you can bring into Unreal to do different shaders and effects and colors and all that stuff. So yeah, just kind of using different layers and subtracting them, masking them out, and then kind of cleaning them up and merging them back into yeah, the end result, which is this guy here. So we got a couple different layers here that we're going to bring back into Unreal. So this is the end result in the engine. You can see we've just used all those different layers and masks to yeah, to create different looks for different environments. We got rock, we got kind of this like dirt ground shading, and then also yeah, one aspect of our game is you bring back like light to like a dark world. So we kind of have two different looks for every world. So here it is, kind of in the light variation of that, and you can see we've used all of those layers that we generated in Houdini to generate in Unreal different foliage in different areas. So that's very powerful. Not having to paint the foliage by hand saves a lot of time. So that's definitely a very cool technique to explore. So yeah, we still have a lot more exploration we're going to do in terms of like building out our tools more. We're definitely going to expose some parameters and the HDA and Unreal that's going to allow like level designers to more easily make things and not have to just rely on myself, the Houdini artist. So next in the presentation, that kind of sums up our like behind the scenes look in terms of how we used Houdini to prototype our look for our kind of overall base terrains for our levels. Now we're going to go into some different tools and generators that we made to make stylized like sci-fi assets to populate the world with. So the first thing that we're going to go over is this kind of like sci-fi like space station debris kind of generator. If you ever look at any like sci-fi art, they always have these like really cool looking like rings, deconstructed like space station kind of stuff. So we wanted to make something that could generate that easily in Houdini. And this is the asset here, and it's pretty straightforward to do. You just kind of take any base shape you want. In our case, it's a torus. We remesh it to get the kind of desired density we want. And then we branch off to make the kind of like trellis effect. We basically create a group from the edges of the torus, and then we take that edge group and we convert it into curves, and then we add a poly wire to create that like trellis effect. And then, as you can see here, some of these faces are kind of like the higher up we go, the more deleted these primitives are. So to do that, we have two different primitive SOPs. Or sorry, primitive wrangles, bad. So the first one basically takes, basically create an attribute called the Y position. And the higher it is, the closer to 1 it is, the lower it is, the closer to 0 it is. So we basically take the height, maximum height, we fit it to a range of 0 to 1. We store that as an attribute. And then we have our next primitive, or sorry, point wrangle. We basically go through and using that, we use the random number generated using a seed from the ptnum. We use that like Y position and we multiply that by the random number. So that basically has greater odds for the primitive to get deleted the higher it is. And then the lower odds are, it's less chance for it to get deleted towards the bottom. So we actually kind of use like a 0.5 as like a cutoff. So anything above 0.5 is going to increasingly higher chance to get deleted. And then below 0.5, it is not going to get deleted. We just kind of loop through that, delete some faces, kind of merge it back together and add some normals. And then we just have a nice shape that we use to Boolean out part of it to kind of make part of it look like it was like chipped off or missing. We just kind of clean it up and yeah, you're good to go. And again, you could use this, you could plug in any kind of shape you want and you can kind of get this nice like broken up like space station kind of look. So the next thing we're going to go over are creating some like stylized cliffs. So this is the end result of what we did, and I've got to get a shout out to CG Monkey King for the copy and stamp technique that we're going to go into here. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to create your base shape. In our case, we're just using like a pyramid. Get a nice scale that you want. We're going to remesh it to the kind of desired like density that we want. We're going to use a mountain SOP to distort it a bit, get a little more interesting kind of shape in there. We're going to add some normals and transform it up a bit to get a nice elongated kind of jagged rock. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create basically a series of points that we can copy this to. So we're going to create a box and we're going to use a point from volume, and we're going to basically get up points inside that volume. We're going to add an attribute called ptnum, and that we're going to use as a seed for this copy and stamp node. And basically the idea is to use this copy stamp to basically get some random rotation and random scale to copy all these pieces back to. So basically have a transform right before we pipe into the copy stamp that just has like a basic fit operation with a range on it. And we're using that myID as a seed, and we just randomize the scale and rotation, and we copy it back till we get something like this. Then to get a little more detail in there, the next thing we do is I'm just kind of combining it and cleaning it up and remeshing it, adding a little nice bevel to it. But then we actually convert it to a volume, and we add a volume SOP and some basic noise to it to get the look that we wanted. We convert it back to polys, add some normals, do a poly reduce, and we get our final result. So the last thing we're going to go over is creating some stylized rocks. So I got to give a shout out to IndiePixel for this chipping technique that I'm about to show you. So here is the final result of what we're going to go through. So you can start out with any base shape that you want. In this case, we're using a sphere. Kind of modifying it a bit to get the look that we want. Transforming it, and then the really cool thing about this technique is we add some normals in, so we have normals. We use a for loop, and we're going to use a clipping node inside of that loop. And it's going to take the position of the normal and the orientation, and it's going to loop through and basically chip off the edges to kind of give this really cool, like, chipped rock look. So yeah, so we basically, inside of this clip node and the origin, we're going to use the position and the normals, and then also for the direction, the same thing. And then we're going to add in a polyfill to fill in those like chipped areas. And we're going to end up with a cool shape like this. You can see all the chipping that this is done. It's going to do that for every point. And then after we do that, we're basically just going to run it through a little cleanup process, some remeshing, adding back in some normals, a bevel, and in our case, we're going to subdivide it and then poly reduce it. And then, yeah, this is what we end up with. And this is a really cool, super powerful technique you can use on a lot of different types of assets to give this kind of like stylized chip look. You could also add, more noise and further refine it if you also want to go for like a more of a photoreal look as well. So that concludes this presentation. I want to thank Houdini for having me and letting me show what we've been up to everyone here. And if you guys want to learn more about me or follow what I've been doing, it's just Twitter is Pale Blue Motion. And then if you want to follow the progress of our game, Shoulders of Giants, that's twitter.com/shouldersofg. And also the website for the game is movingpieces.io/SOG. Thanks, everybody. Hope you enjoyed this. Take care.